you have branches of movements that have come up because of a consulate, because of an embassy. For example, you find your different foundations that lead movements or that lead organizations based on what they are based on what their beliefs are. But right now, we need to take cognizance that that indigenous movements should start playing a much prominent role in terms of settling democracy. In this instance, I'm referring to myself as air movement, as the shutting down movements, and so forth. So these movements over the past years have played a critical role in ensuring that our rights, as based now on what they are founded upon, that the state ensures that those rights and those beliefs are, as enshrined by the Constitution, are definitely being heard of, being heard, and also being implemented. In cases like in those movements. So the issue is that as Ramcom, our role is to make sure that the government, the state plays an important role in ensuring that all our roles, all our rights, as be it your civil, be your equality, be it economic and employment issues are championed. But because of the lack of political interest and because of lack of political will, young people ended up now creating such movements to ensure that their rights and are being held.
Can I just ask you, you explained movements, but how do they relate to political parties? Do movements become political parties, or do they operate in a different zone?
Yeah, like I said earlier on, is that the issue that we have is that in Namibia is that movements, young people leave political parties because political parties currently in time are not championing their ideas. For example, if I political party say that no, we want to eliminate poverty, we want to create more jobs, but then you have been a political party for 5, 10 years, but then there is no practicality in terms of creating policy or creating an environment for young people to flourish. So therefore, young people then say that okay, let's rather go and form our own movement, our own platform, where we are then able to hold that particular party accountable for what they have been, say, campaigning for towards those elections. So young people generally form movements because of lack of accountability from the political party, and also that and also with the sake of that they themselves need a space to participate, and the political party themselves where they are not allowing them to participate fairly and give it.
Okay, thank you. Let me come to Honourable Masua. Could you also just maybe comment in general about what you think about the state of democracy in Namibia, what the factors are that might be causing any challenges at the moment, and maybe also just reflect maybe on some of the issues for young people in our current democracy?
Yeah, I think very interesting statistics that we have there. But I do want to look at those statistics that were presented through a different lens. On the flip side of the coin, the current state of our democracy is, I think, of the most progressive that we've had since independence. Our political landscape has been so polarized for the last 20, 25, 30 years, and for the first time ever, we have north of 5 people that are under the age of 35 in Parliament. That's important. We have one of the most diverse parliaments that we've ever had since independence, culturally, in terms of age, in terms of parties being on different stages of the political spectrum. That's very important. We've also, in the last 2 elections, seen that many new political parties have come onto the political scene. And that's very important in terms of having diversity. So even though the statistics may tell us that we have less people that are perhaps reasons, I think that we've made significant progress just in terms of diversifying the political landscape of the country. I've also seen that because of the voter demographics that has changed, we obviously have a more younger electorate. We have a more educated voter voter demographic currently. So that means the type of accountability that governments need to respond to, the responsiveness that governments, particularly on young people's issues, is a lot higher. We don't expect politics of political parties telling us that they've freed the country and so on and so forth. That perhaps were the demands of the previous generation. But there's really a stronger need for economic emancipation, particularly in a post-COVID-19 landscape. So the type of accountability that citizens are demanding from governments is much higher than what we've seen 10, 15 years ago. And those are significant milestones because it means that we are progressing in the level at which we operate, both in parliament but also the government at large. I do think that the state of the debates that we have, for example, in parliament, is a bit disappointing, especially considering, we've been independent north of 30 years now. We would have expected, and I think particularly the young members of parliament, for example, would have expected a higher level of debate in parliament. You'd see that our debates are still centered around really basics, and as a lawyer, it's quite disappointing the level at which we're debating currently in Parliament, the level at which we are passing bills, for example. But we must look at the successes. In the current Parliament, we have seen, and we discussed it last week in the Committee for Constitutional and Legal Affairs, it's the first Parliament in which we've seen the number of petitions that we've ever had, ever since the inception of this Parliament, since independence. This tells you that Namibians are, I think, now more than ever aware of their rights, of their democratic rights, and I think parliaments have to respond to that. We now have the pleasure and honor to draft the rules of dealing with petitions, whereas previously that wasn't even a concern for Parliament. And so I think we have a very enlightened and educated electorate. And even though confidence in government may have dropped slightly in the last couple of years, we do know that those who actually participate meaningfully. And that for me is very important. When it comes to the participation of young people, I think the same can be said. A lot of young people are now flooding the number of those in the demographic that can vote. Obviously, we've seen a lot of voter apathy, and this could be accrued to an array of reasons. But what we must appreciate is that we have a diverse political scene. We have the most educated young people that we've ever seen in the history of the political landscape of the country. I think that needs to be appreciated, and that needs to be just taken further. We need to strengthen the participation in our democratic processes, and that's the only way that we're really able to hold our governments accountable. But I do think that the statistics inform us very importantly that we have an educated electorate that demands a higher level of accountability. One thing that we can really credit government for is our media freedom, which really plays a pivotal role in ensuring that governments can be held accountable in an honest and in a transparent manner. We see in many other African states that there's a lot of media suppression. That is one of the things that really, disallows for honest accountability when it comes to governments responding. But one area that we are really progressing in, particularly on the African continent and even broader, is really that freedom of media, and that is one of the tools that we use to really strengthen our democracy.
an improvement in terms of some of the figures, but that doesn't seem to be happening. So why, at a time in our history when we seem to have more choice for people in terms of the political parties that are around, and probably more effective parties than we've had in the past, are we slumping down? And how much is this part of a global trend that we almost can't avoid? And how much is it a Namibian specific thing?
Yes, I think on the issue of party formation, it's a reflection of the fact that the Namibian political system allows parties to form and that there's no high cost of entry. So it's very easy to form a political party. It's also relatively easy to gain representation, a single seat in parliament. It's a couple of thousand votes. But that doesn't say anything about the effectiveness of that party or the effectiveness of that party in parliament. I don't think parliament has become more effective. I think, in fact, the opposite has happened. Just yesterday, or the day before, we had this publication in the newspapers about the number of bills passed and so on. I think we're blaming COVID. What I've been trying to do is to say many of these trends that we're observing has started long before COVID. So the number of political parties that are in parliament or that are participating in elections, South Africa had 48, right? That doesn't say anything about the quality of the parties. I think that's where we're lacking. Our institutions, they're there, and we always govern by indicators. We want the right number of women in here, we want the right number of this in there. But it doesn't say anything about the quality, and I think that's what Namibians are commenting on. I don't see their lack of voting as apathy. I think it's a failure of political parties to inspire people to register to vote, to inspire people to actually incur the costs of voting, because parties have run out of ideas. We are at this point seemingly framing our presidential debate for the ruling party as whether we're ready for it to be a woman or not, or a woman or not. The point is, we're in trouble. We need somebody that can inspire voters. Most of the people who stopped voting are ruling party supporters. They've not re-engaged with the opposition, which I think says something about the opposition. And in a democracy, there's no change in the status quo unless those who joined or left the ruling party joins an opposition force who then succeeds to achieve a victory. So for me, the whole thing is we need to get away from this ticking the boxes into making substantive differences. And I think we haven't seen those. We have used an indicator, what we call the effective number of votes, parties based on votes. We had it was around 2.3 in the beginning, in 1989, meaning we had almost two equally sized parties if you put everything together. We're now just over 2 again. It's the first time, but it's still not a reflection of the strength and the quality of these smaller parties. If we lump them together, they're just about one.
Okay, let me ask George, the way you described movements before, it was like protest movements, trying to question and hold the status quo to account. But surely the point would be for young people is how would you gain power? I mean, we've seen AR enter the political arena and now has some councillors, because protest movements have a purpose and a point in democracies, but ultimately, if you want to influence things and even control things, you have to gain a level of political power. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think look at some point you can't go to the person but you also need to become a player. So the player also influence either be a defender or scoring the goal. So this is that social movement at some point will need to form to become political parties so that they can either form government or be part of government and where they can effectively impact change. So at some point, I think that social movements will from party, but then at some point also that one thing I also much like more like a negative tool is that now if you go into power and then either you become what you were fighting against or you become manipulated. some sort experience, some sort experience in terms of how to lead the state, because not everybody is able to do that. And once you don't, once you are not able to do that, you then become what you're fighting against. So at some point, social movements need to form government, but also you don't need to form government to effect change, but you can still remain outside government and still get that change. There's a lot of movements. Example is the movement, the land movement based in Brazil, where there's still a social movement, but before every political party decides on a candidate or decides on the vision campaign, they go to these people of Brazil and say, can you back us? Can you give us support to form that president? Because at some point, as you all know from the staff board, from the ANC, at some point they said that no, they want to become political movements and remain movements for social justice. But then at the end of the day, they became movement, they became political parties. And the political parties themselves started eating within themselves through greed and corruption. So we want to prevent that from happening as well.
Okay, good. Let me come back to patience and just ask you about the role of Parliament. You alluded to the fact that there are some positive developments in Parliament. And one of the things we mentioned in IPPR is that now the committee system is up and running properly, there are certainly more possibilities for civil society to insert themselves into the debates and to attend hearings and give their evidence and so on. So I just wondered, how do you see that Parliament can play a role in turning around some of these situations and then making things more positive in the future?
I think Parliament has done that, certainly in the current Parliament, the 7th Parliament. In terms of the public hearings, the outcomes aren't necessarily always what we would desire them to be. For example, the abortion debates, there's a lot of backward thinking, and this can be accrued to who takes part in the public hearings. But the public hearings are happening. I think what parliaments can do is publicize this more so that more people take part in the committee process. The committee stages are very important because this is where the actual legislative changes take place. At the committee stages, that is really where the changes happen. We know that there are a lot of public hearings currently also in Fatima. There are public hearings taking place. There were public hearings on abortion, although I wasn't really happy with the quality of the outcomes that we got there. That's because of my own views. But I do think it's necessary that Parliament takes the steps to publicize this more so that there is more participation. And the confidence of the people comes when they know that their presence and their inputs are integrated into the outcomes of the committee public hearings that they have. The committees are very active. There's a lot of work, especially now with the committee for constitutional and legal affairs. Obviously we're not working at the pace that we're supposed to, even in terms of passing bills. We're not working at the pace that we're supposed to. I do remember that the Committee of Rape Amendment Bill, Committee of Domestic Violence Amendment Bill, these bills, came last year already. By the time I entered Parliament, I found some of these bills and they're still not passed. What's necessary is that the debates are taking place. What's necessary is that there's progress. Obviously, we can do more, we can work faster, but it's really, really a rigorous process, lots of meticulous work that goes in. And with the diversity of the political parties that we have, language is challenged. We're sitting with a challenge in the Committee of Domestic Violence Amendment Bill on whether or not to include both sexes, them being of opposite sexes. And just such minor language detail can take so long, to get it right. And the important thing is that once we pass these bills, we do it in the right way. but definitely increasing the publicity so that the people that we have during these public hearings come from strongly based and supported civil society organizations and even individuals. The church groups are equally as important. The groups of activists are equally as important. But having them at the table is very important, and I think Parliament's responsibility then comes in terms of publicizing and making it widely known that people are actually part and parcel of the process of changing our laws.
Great, thank you. We're under time pressure, but I think we could take one round of questions from the floor.
The problem that I'm having, or why Parliament or National Assembly specific has lost trust, is because the dominance of the executive. The young members can speak all they want, but when the executive is there and it's a code, you cannot do anything about it because I experienced it, I work there, so I know what's going on there. That's one. Two, the issue of movements. Movements are great, but movements can only be great when people can trust them. You see, the problem is that we trust you to a certain extent that what is your point? You want to uplift the people out of poverty and then what? At times you also run out of ideas also when you come there. So please, that must be one of the things which I would want to show you today. Lastly, I will come back also to Parliament or the issue of why the executive know how to clip the National Assembly or Parliament. They give Parliament to approve the budget. But what they do is the opposite. Parliament's work is to do oversight. You know what the Minister of Finance do? He makes sure that he gives less money for Parliament to do oversight on ministries. So that is also one of the things that they play a role with. Thank you very much.
Is it not our responsibility as Namibians to become more engaged, just as much as it is the responsibility of parties to inspire us to be engaged? Should we also not be engaged? Because I think it relates to the point that Mr. Hopwood made in the beginning, that there's almost a disconnect in the sense that there's so much freedom, right, to express our thoughts and so forth, but then also they were not happy with the quality of democracy. Does that not mean that we're expressing our concerns at the wrong platforms? We should actually be expressing these concerns in the platform of political parties. And the reason that I say this is because we say that we're unhappy with our local authorities and we're unhappy with members of parliament, but it is through political parties that community representatives are fielded to local authority and fielded to parliament. So if we do not use that space to bring about change, then I think our talking and our complaining is almost in vain because we're doing it at the wrong platforms. So I am a big advocate for people joining political parties, not just giving them your vote, but being at the table and holding them accountable from the inside and shaping them from the inside. As young people, we are not doing that, and there's a responsibility on us to do that.
I think there may be other factors, but the fact that young people, we do not appreciate democracy in the sense that we don't know what it means. It's only because maybe I went to school or other families went to school and they do come across democracy. But if you go outside, they don't understand democracy. That's why during the voting period, you get people saying, I'm not going to vote. That clearly tells you that people do not understand what democracy is. They don't understand the definition. They don't understand their responsibilities in a democratic state. They don't understand the obligations that they have, the roles to play in the democratic state as a member of the democratic state. They don't understand it. So you cannot die or partake in something that you don't understand or you don't appreciate. And also another thing is, we may not be interested in democracy because it seems like it's not working for us. People are hungry. I remember having a conversation with a Speaker of Parliament. I said, why not look at more vital issues? Those burning points. People are hungry. You are talking about abortion and I'm going to bed hungry. You know? It hurts. Hunger really hurts. Poverty hurts. It's the world, inside of the Parliament, it's a different world. But when you go out there, it's another world. So I don't think anybody will be interested in something that is not working for them unless we're not fine.
Thank you. One more, maybe. I'll get to you later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Franz. I think perhaps for me the issue that I want to mention is more of what Mr. Christian it's coming from your contribution. I think when you discuss the issue around party frame, and I feel like you are not really diving into within the democratic aspect of parties or political parties. And when you are outlining maybe all these factors that contribute to this decline in percentage of whether citizens or Namibians are interested in political parties, it makes sense, but I do feel like an institution like Afrobarometer that's really key in generating opinion. You ought also to look into within political parties how the democracies exist or practice within political parties. And I feel this is perhaps one of the things, this is really my view that we are not observing keenly. This is one issue that SWAPO as a ruling party, in most cases, in keeping democracy alive, SWAPO in most cases, there is this beg. Because, for instance, what happened with ECN, there was that pronouncement that political parties, those who want to contest them, must resign. And initially, they don't do that. So, but SWAPO had to, because it has to react and protect the integrity of democracy and of the institution, it has to tell its members to resign. So, what I'm trying to say here, there is an obligation that SWAPO is committed, but we don't really see this as something important in strengthening democracy. If SWAPO don't commit to that, other parties, we had a case with PDM, they didn't do anything. The case of the election of the members withdrawn from Parliament is a classic example of certain democracy within political parties. But we don't see that. It was just a question of Afrobarometer to look beyond and also see how ruling parties, political parties, are exercising democracy. Because this is what gives birth to the whole overall democracy that we have in the country. Thank you.
Thanks. Very quickly, Kelvin, because I know you've been jumping up and down there. Can you keep it very brief?
Thank you, my name is Kelvin. I report for England and for the Belgium, the guy that makes noise and radio every morning from Monday to Friday. What are the limitations to your research so that we can understand whether we should take it with a pinch of salt or we should take the whole bottle? And how sustainable is the system of governance in Africa at a time when coup d'etats are almost becoming as stylish and as fashionable as the ladies' hairstyle? We have seen in Mali 2 coup d'etats in the space of 2 years, a coup in Guinea, Sudan, Chad, Burkina Faso, and attempted coup in DRC and other countries. So, are we here to champion democracy as sustainable as the future, or this is a system that's really an experiment that is failing to live up to its billing?
We are over our time now, so there's going to be more space in the future sessions to bring issues. But can I ask, first of all, George, to respond to any of the issues that have been raised, but also make any concluding remarks as well?
Thank you very much. I want to respond to the lady that raised. At some point, we owe it to ourselves as young people to participate in political parties. Some of us have been there by since birth. Then also, since you are in a political party, as a young person, you are also not heard. You try by all means and processes to be heard, but still at the same point in time, you're not allowed to go onto the table or into the room rather. Not at the table, but just to enter the room where issues are being made. So young people start this engaging in that factor. It's not because that they don't want to speak to the political party, but it's rather that their efforts and their wishes are not being heard. So young people, for me, I rather say that young people, let's rather start creating our own platforms. Not only that we believe that are able to provide the same impact that we want, the same impact that we wish the parties to make, and also to influence those decisions to be made as well. For example, we said earlier in 2014, we had notion that we want to ensure that land and housing is brought to the center stage, and that any housing that Namibians, especially young Namibians, get access to land. And we thought that really time to be something that would just be done in a year, but we're now 9 years down the road. And since we are on the bench, since we are outside, we are not at the table. We're no longer when they're outside or in the room, we're not at the table because we said that let's make our own platform to influence decision making. And right now, Parliament is busy getting our petition on them. That's why. Second is also that as young people, generally, it's also that with NID example, NID does great work in terms of simplification, where they train young people on simplification basically. But then also we young people are not interested. We rather go to another show, we rather go to some Chris Brown show instead of on a Saturday afternoon, where they just sit an hour or two and understand what does having rights mean. Because everybody said, I know my rights. But didn't that your right also mean that also responsibility towards it. Because you don't just have rights, I know responsibilities. And I don't want that we as example tend to forget. And for as long as you have a right to vote, you also have a responsibility to hold a particular party or institution accountable. But you don't just vote and then go home. And also, people in political parties and movements have also right to campaign. But at the same time, as a campaigning, people have the right to hold them accountable, and they also have to hold people accountable as well. And in my closing remarks, that our democracy is ready to, in the past 8 years, it has been flourishing because every year and every day, young people are standing up to get our voices really, and young people are creating their own platform. But then at the same time, we are going into a fragile state or a fragile democracy, whereby the state itself or the regime the regime itself is building up mechanisms to prevent from happening. And what everybody says, every day when a young person stands up, especially people from outside the political sphere stand up, they are told that no, that guy is corrupt, that guy does not understand politics, he's a politician, but it's a young person that's came up. That if the state continues suppressing young people from standing up, we will definitely end up where, like Thomas said, we end up at a state where Mali is right now, where there's 2 stars in the space of 2 years, where the pastor can't provide meals and to all people. So we are going into a very, 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 very delicate stage as democracy. But as long as the state suppresses voices, or as long as the state does not embrace new thoughts, new thinking, we will definitely end up in the state where other African countries are.
Thank you, George. And is Patience still online? Yes. Can I also ask you then to just respond to any of the issues raised and make any concluding remarks? We can't hear you. I don't know, is your volume on?
Yes, are you able to hear me, Graham?
Yeah, that's fine. You can hear you. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, just to dispel the notion that the state is suppressing young people's voices, I think it's quite the contrary. Young people are, very much involved and very much free, particularly in the landscape of the freedom of media that we celebrate as a country. But I just wanted to comment on the issue with the executive, somehow bulldozing motions through Parliament. That's incorrect. The essence of democracy really is representation, and we have a representative portion of members in Parliament from various different parties, and you've seen a number of bills, for example, that we couldn't get through because of opposition parties that perhaps were not happy with it. Previously, we didn't have the level of engagement from opposition parties in Parliament as we do now. The issue of the budget is also noteworthy. I think this year was the first year when the budget was challenged in Parliament, even by ruling party MPs, where the Minister of Finance actually ended up adjusting the budget that was allocated to Parliament to carry out its oversight function. Yes, we could do more, but I do think credit needs to be given to what we've managed to get through in terms of the budget, particularly in the tough circumstances that we find ourselves in. I really appreciate the comment by the young lady, I didn't get her name, my apologies, where she says there's a burden, a portion of the burden that also rests on young people to partake in political processes, as much as there is a burden on political parties to appeal to people. And the reason why we have so many alternative political parties that I think is very crucial in our political context is because people need to have an alternative, and that's the essence of democracy. If a particular political party doesn't appeal to you, having the freedom and the accessibility and the option within a functional democratic state to choose an alternative political party, I think that's the essence of democracy, and I think that's what we need to really appreciate in the political times that we're in. But all in all, I think we've made significant strides that we should not, that we must appreciate. We must appreciate that we really have the most diverse political climate that we've ever had in the history of the Republic of Namibia. Credit needs to be given to that, even though there is a lot more that we as Parliament-specific can do to improve.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you, Patience. Christy, a couple of remarks to say.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer any of these questions specifically. I think they're too diverse and too many of them. Let me just say something about political parties. I think there's a real issue around resources. The dominant position of the ruling party is not just established through voting, but there's an art to domination. The allocation of resources to political parties is a contentious issue. At the moment, it's proportional, which means SWAPO receive over 80% of the resources, state resources. It's very difficult to build political parties if you don't have resources, which is why they become these cartel movements who are more interested in gaining state resources because their members cannot support them. There's no party that raised the amount of money that's now being spent on a headquarters, for example. So what can you do? I think there's a lot more work that needs to go into politics. If any of these political parties that are present can come up with a plan of job creation, has anybody got one? How will we secure economic growth? All these big questions, how will we narrow the income gap? All these things, Namibians have been asking for better employment since 1999. Unemployment is the worst it's ever been. The question is, how do you sell yourself? We've issued invitations to all political parties to talk about these issues. Not one single party has accepted our offer. Which political parties do research to figure out what's the best way to reach my members? What's the best way to gain support? How can I generate the kinds of programs that I need to take to voters? I'm not surprised people don't want to vote for parties. And political parties, to some extent, benefit from the fact that they no longer mass movements. How can parties decide to replace people who've been elected by voters? We've had now 2 cases where that has happened. People have voted for candidates, the parties changed them because it doesn't suit them.
So I think there's a lot wrong with parties. They can be fixed, provided that they're willing to do so. And I think parties need to go back to become mass political organizations. People who do door-to-door campaigning, that engage their people on a very small level. What is very interesting in South Africa, for example, is the number of very small organizations that are location-bound, that have now won elections at local level, and that are starting to fix service provision in squatter camps, for example. It's possible to do so. You don't have to be the biggest party, but there's no focus, there's no plan, and then there's the problem of resources. So you need to be creative.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Christy. So we've come to the end of our session. Just a note, because I think people have asked why we only had a software MP partaking, and we've asked a number of opposition MPs to participate today in panels. We did target the younger female MPs, and I mean, for good reasons. There are a lot of the patients is travelling and made herself available, but others are also travelling abroad in the country. So we did particularly try LPM and PDM, and we weren't able to get anybody on the platform, just in case anybody wonders why I was only a software MP. But thanks very much. Great session, great questions. Let's move on to the next and interrogate the issues even more deeply.